The last light of October stretched long golden fingers across the foothills of Colorado as Dr. Owen Blake eased his dusty pickup truck along Highway 18. The tires hummed quietly on the worn asphalt, the world bathed in burnt orange twilight. He had just finished a 12-hour shift at the vet clinic, 3 calves delivered, 1 border collie stitched up, and a tough goodbye with a farmer's aging mare. All he wanted now was Lena's stew and a quiet evening on their ranch, nestled between the pine-covered ridges west of Bailey. But fate had other plans. 2 miles from home, he spotted a dark form by the roadside. 100 drivers would have passed it without a second glance, but not Owen. 2 decades of tending animals had trained his eyes to catch even the smallest flicker of fur in motion. He pulled over, stepped out into the crisp air, and walked slowly toward the shape. A female bobcat lay crumpled in the gravel, still warm, but lifeless. She had likely been hit hours earlier. The sight hit Owen hard. He'd seen his share of tragedies, but wild mothers always struck a particular chord. He knelt beside her, whispering a soft apology to the silence. Then he heard it. A faint, high-pitched mewl, so soft he almost missed it, came from the dry grass a few feet away. He turned sharply, scanning with practiced eyes, until they settled on a tiny bundle of spotted fur. No more than 2 weeks old, the kitten's sides rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. Its eyes were barely open, its paws limp, its tongue dry. "Oh, little one," Owen murmured. His heart clenched. The bobcat was starving, cold, and almost gone. He didn't hesitate. Unzipping his jacket, he carefully lifted the kitten and tucked it inside, close to the warmth of his chest. "You're not dying out here," he whispered. "Not on my watch." At home, the reaction was expected. "Are you serious?" Lena asked, standing over the kitchen counter where the kitten now lay wrapped in a towel. "You brought home a wild bobcat. You know that's illegal without permits." "I already called Mike," Owen replied, warming formula on the stove. "He'll bring the emergency rehab paperwork in the morning. Rehab centers are over capacity. He said I'm the best option. I couldn't leave it." Their 13-year-old daughter, Nora, leaned closer, eyes wide with both concern and wonder. "Is it a boy or girl?" "Boy," Owen said, testing the formula's temperature on his wrist. "Barely hanging on." "Then he needs a name," Nora declared. "Something wild." "How about Rye?" Lena offered, almost against her own will. "Like the color of his fur?" Nora grinned. "Rye. I love it." The kitten barely had the strength to suckle the syringe Owen offered. Nora held her breath, watching every swallow. And then Maple padded in. The family's 5-year-old golden retriever had watched silently from the doorway. Now, with quiet purpose, she stepped forward, placed her front paws gently on the edge of the counter, and sniffed. Slowly, Maple leaned in and gave the kitten a single, soft lick between his ears. Rye squeaked. His tiny body relaxed, eyelids fluttering. For the first time since his rescue, his breathing slowed. "Well, I'll be damned," Owen said softly. "She just claimed him." Lena's hands were on her hips, but her eyes had softened. "This is temporary, Owen. Very temporary." But Rye had already curled against the towel, and Maple had settled beside the counter, standing guard. That night, as the wind swept over the hills and the first frost whispered across the windows, something unspoken shifted inside the Blake household. Rye had come from the wild, but for now, in this quiet place of wood and firelight, he had found a pack. By mid-November, winter had swept down from the Colorado peaks, blanketing the Blake ranch in a soft hush. Snow draped the fences, the pine trees, and the rooftop where smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Inside, the house pulsed with warmth, wood stove crackling, soup simmering, and the rhythm of small, wild paws scurrying across the floor. Rye was growing stronger by the day. Once frail and silent, he now tumbled over fleece blankets, swatted at pine cones Nora brought in for him, and chewed anything that resembled prey, including Owen's bootlaces. His fur had thickened into a gorgeous spotted coat, and his pale blue eyes were darkening to the amber gold of his kind. Yet no one had expected Maple's devotion. The golden retriever trailed Rye like a shadow. She nudged him awake at feeding time, groomed his ears with motherly precision, and curled around him like a living nest each night. She'd never been trained to do it. No one had asked. But Maple had made a quiet decision. This Bobcat was hers. "He follows her more than he follows us," Owen noted one morning, watching from the porch as Rye bounded after Maple in the snow, attempting to copy her paw prints. "She's teaching him how to be something." "She's teaching him how to belong," Lena said, cradling her coffee. But the harmony wasn't without cracks. As Rye's energy grew, so did his instincts. He began stalking the barn cats, playing, yes, but rougher than before. He scaled furniture with uncanny agility. One night, he cornered a squirrel in the attic and growled when Owen tried to intervene. "He's still a bobcat," Lena warned. "We can't forget that." "I haven't," Owen replied. "That's why I'm building the enclosure." By December's first storm, a large outdoor space had been constructed near the edge of their wooded acreage. It was half wild by design, enclosed with mesh and natural fencing, filled with logs, brush, and places to climb. A safe transition space. Rye didn't like it. He paced. He sulked. But eventually, especially with Maple curled just outside the gate each night, he adapted. Nora kept a journal titled Wild Things. She tracked Rye's weight, sketched his prints, logged every new behavior. "He chuffs when he sees Maple now," she wrote. "That's how tigers say hello. I wonder if it means the same thing for him." Then came the snowstorm. On a quiet Saturday, with wind howling through the pines and visibility dropping fast, Owen went out to check on Rye. The enclosure was empty. Panicked, he called for Lena and Nora. They scoured the yard, checked the feed bin, the barn loft. Nothing. Rye was gone. The mesh hadn't been cut, but a portion had been lifted near the base. Snow disturbed just enough to show claw marks, and a tunnel dug from the inside. "He dug his way out," Owen said, stunned. "He's gone." Nora tried to hold it in, but her voice cracked. "Did we push him too fast?" Maple was already circling, nose to the wind. Then, suddenly, she took off, tail high, straight toward the tree line. They followed. Half a mile into the woods, just past a rise covered in wind-blown snow, they found her, sitting calmly, ears forward. Rye was there, not lost, not hurt. Perched atop a log, eyes focused upward. In the trees above, a great horned owl hooted into the dusk. "He's watching," Nora whispered. "Learning." The bobcat didn't run. He didn't approach. He simply stared, then blinked slowly, as if acknowledging them. Then, silently, he slipped down into the underbrush. That night, Rye didn't return, but Maple waited at the enclosure door until dawn. Spring came slowly to the Colorado foothills. Snow lingered in the shaded creases of the forest, but soft green shoots had begun pushing through the thawing soil. The creek behind the Blake Ranch babbled louder each day. and with the season's change came a quiet transformation none of them had dared hope for. Rye came back. It was early morning when Nora, bleary-eyed and still in her pajamas, heard the soft tap on the kitchen window. At first, she thought it was a branch. Then she saw him, standing on the porch railing, golden eyes calm, tail curled, looking in as if no time had passed. "Dad!" she called, racing to open the door. The bobcat stepped inside like a ghost returning home. He padded over to his old food bowl, sniffed once, then sat beside Maple, who greeted him with a single thump of her tail and a gentle nuzzle to his neck. "He remembers everything," Owen whispered. "He chose to come back." Over the weeks that followed, a rhythm began. Rye would vanish into the woods for days, even weeks, then reappear, tapping a window, curling beside Maple on the porch, accepting food and rest on his own terms. He never stayed long, never asked for more than what was given freely. He was no longer a house guest. He was a wild neighbor. "It's like he's formed a pact," Lena observed one evening. "He gets his freedom, but he never forgets his family." More surprising still was Maple's response. The golden retriever had never seemed happier. She walked the property daily with renewed energy, often stopping to sniff the wind or bark once at the trees. Owen suspected she sensed Rye before any of them ever saw him. One evening, the family took their usual trail walk, a 5-mile loop through the forest beyond their fence line. Nora brought her sketch pad. Maple trotted ahead, and then, without warning, Rye stepped out of the trees. He walked beside Maple as if he had never left. Nora's pencil dropped. "He's joining us?" Rye didn't bolt. He walked in rhythm with Maple, occasionally dashing into the brush to investigate a bird or pounce on a leaf, always returning. The two animals moved like a unit, silent communication, mirrored steps. "Look at that," Owen murmured. "They're reading each other." He began taking notes. As a veterinarian, he'd studied animal behavior for years, but nothing in the literature prepared him for this. Rye wasn't just tolerant of Maple. He responded to her cues, mirrored her pauses, even looked back when she stopped walking. "It's interspecies bonding," he told Mike on the phone. "Not in a zoo, not in captivity. Out here, on equal ground." Mike laughed. "Write a paper. Or better yet, write a book." But Owen was too busy watching. By June, they began leaving the enclosure open full-time. Rye came and went as he pleased. Some nights, he slept on the porch beside Maple. Other times, he disappeared for a week, then returned muddy, wild-eyed, and tired, but whole. "Do you think he'll stay forever?" Nora asked one twilight as they watched Rye disappear into the trees once more. Owen shook his head. "No, he's becoming what he was meant to be. But the fact that he chooses to come back, that means something." That summer, Nora wrote a short essay titled "The Pact" and entered it into the state junior wildlife competition. She didn't expect much. 2 months later, she was invited to present at a regional symposium. The story of a bobcat and a dog, told by a girl who had grown up with both, moved even the most seasoned biologists. It wasn't just about wildlife anymore. It was about trust, choice, and the quiet truth that family doesn't always come with the same fur or instincts. Sometimes it simply begins with a single act of kindness, and a paw resting gently beside another. By the time autumn returned, Rye's visits had grown less frequent, but never less meaningful. He came in the early mornings, or near dusk, silent as a falling leaf, always tapping the same porch window, always looking for Maple first. Maple, now 7, had mellowed with age but still leapt to her feet at the sound. Their reunions were simple. No barking, no theatrics. Just a lean, a nose touch, and a shared silence that said everything. One brisk November morning, Owen was out feeding the horses when he noticed Maple standing at the edge of the yard, her body still, ears pointed toward the tree line. Then he saw Rye. The bobcat stood just beyond the clearing, his coat rich with autumn gold, muscles lean and powerful. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, cautious and silent, emerged a second bobcat, smaller, slimmer, its fur lighter and eyes wide with youthful wariness. A cub, maybe 10 months old. Owen froze. "Lena," he called softly toward the house. "Nora, you need to see this." From the porch, the family watched, breath held, as Rye stepped forward, eyes on Maple. Then he paused, turned, and gave a subtle gesture with his head, barely more than a glance. The younger bobcat followed. They approached slowly, warily, but with purpose. Maple remained still, tail gently sweeping the frosted porch. When Rye stopped a few feet away, his companion hesitated, then mimicked him. And then it happened. Rye stepped aside. The younger bobcat moved forward and, tentatively, pressed its nose to Maple's shoulder. It was not a play for dominance. It was not aggression. It was, somehow, an introduction. "He brought his child to meet her," Lena whispered, her voice thick. Nora's hands clutched the porch rail. "He remembers everything, every kindness." They didn't move. No one wanted to break the moment. Eventually, Rye led the young one back into the woods, glancing back only once. Maple stayed seated long after they vanished. That night, Owen sat by the fire, journal in his lap. "He trusts us," he said aloud, "not just as people, as part of his story." Over the next few weeks, the new pattern emerged. Rye would return, sometimes alone, sometimes with the young bobcat. The cub grew more confident, often exploring the edges of the property. It never approached humans, never crossed the invisible line Rye had once crossed. But it came, by choice. One morning, after a fresh snowfall, they found tracks: Rye, the cub, and 2 more sets, smaller, lighter. "Multiple cubs," Owen said. "He has a whole litter." Maple found them first, beneath the downed pine by the northern fence. A small den, 3 cubs, barely old enough to stand, and no mother in sight. Rye arrived minutes later. He didn't hiss or growl. He simply watched as Maple lay beside the den and let the cubs climb on her paws. He was asking for help. "They need care," Owen said, "and he's brought them here." Within days, a plan was in motion. Owen filed emergency fostering paperwork. He and Lena set up a feeding station close to the den, but far enough to limit imprinting. Nora placed a camera nearby, eager to document. But it was Maple who took on the truest role. Every day, she lay near the cubs, never pushing, never pulling. She didn't replace their wildness, she reassured it. Even as they learned to stalk, to pounce, to disappear, they always circled back to her. Rye would sometimes rest with them all in the grass, eyes half closed, as Maple licked the tops of their heads one by one. It was a sight that defied everything Owen had studied, and yet it felt right. "They're not pets," he reminded the family. "They're kin," Nora said. "And Maple is their bridge." The winters in Colorado always return like old memories, slow, quiet, and heavy with meaning. By the time the first snow of the season dusted the Blake Ranch, the den beneath the pine had gone silent. Rye's cubs, once clumsy and wide-eyed, had grown strong, sleek, and fiercely independent. One by one, they drifted away into the vastness of the forest, called by instinct and the unspoken pull of the wild. Only Maple still lingered by the den sometimes, lying beneath the bare branches, her breath fogging the cold air, as if waiting for someone to return. She was older now. Her muzzle had turned silver, and she no longer chased deer shadows for fun, but her eyes still lit up every time Rye reappeared. And he always did. His visits had grown shorter, less frequent, but more profound. He would arrive in silence, circle the house, check the boundaries. If Maple was inside, he would tap at the window. Sometimes he came alone, other times with one of his grown cubs trailing just behind. "They're showing respect," Owen once said, "like he's bringing them home. Just for a moment." 3 winters passed. Maple was now 10. Her hips had stiffened, her walks shorter. She no longer waited by the woods for Rye, but she still perked up when his scent carried on the wind. Then, one evening in early January, Nora, home from university, noticed Maple whining softly by the back door. She opened it, thinking it was just the cold making her restless. But Maple didn't stop there. She limped toward the woods with quiet urgency, turning back every few steps. Owen and Lena followed. The snow was falling in gentle sheets, muffling their footsteps as they reached the familiar clearing near the old den. And there, beneath the starlit trees, stood Rye. Time had only made him more regal, his coat thick and speckled, his posture confident. But his eyes softened as Maple approached. What happened next brought them all to stillness. Behind Rye, another bobcat stepped forward, slightly smaller, with a distinct crescent-shaped patch above one eye, one of his offspring, grown now, yet still following. Rye looked to Maple, then stepped aside. The younger bobcat, hesitant but calm, approached the aging retriever. Slowly, it lowered its head, touching noses with Maple. Then it pressed its body gently against hers. "Just like before," Nora whispered. "He's passing something on. A legacy, a ritual, a farewell." In the weeks that followed, Rye came only once more. This time, not to the woods. One frosted morning, Owen found him sitting quietly by the front window, watching Maple sleep on her bed by the fire. His paw rested gently against the glass. They opened the door. He entered slowly, respectfully, curling beside the dog who had raised him. The two lay there in silence, breathing in rhythm, until Rye stood, touched noses once more, and slipped back into the snow. Maple passed peacefully 2 weeks later. They buried her at the edge of the clearing, facing the forest. The next day, Nora found something unusual by the simple stone marker, a freshly caught rabbit placed neatly at the base, and beside it, clearly pressed in the snow, a single bobcat paw print. "He came," Lena whispered. "He knew." Years passed. Rye's sightings became rare. But sometimes, on still evenings, when the wind carried through the pines just right, the Blakes would spot a tawny figure at the edge of the woods, watching, waiting, remembering. And once, just once, Nora swore she saw 2 shapes, a large bobcat, and beside him, a golden-furred pup bounding through the snow, a new beginning, Because wild kinship never truly ends. It simply continues, in shadows, in stories, and in every quiet moment where two hearts once touched across the lines of species and instinct.